Hi, and welcome to The Apologician. As we continue to work through Hemant Mehta's 78 questions for Christians, we're starting up at question 26 and 27. He asks, why does God seem more likely to answer prayers of a talented athlete than a starving child overseas? Why does God seem to hate Africa? Both of these questions use the word seem, which of course implies that the concepts of the question are entirely based on the perspective of the question asker. In other words, the question is entirely subjective in its view. So how is a Christian supposed to intelligently answer a question that depends on the perspective of someone else? Is he referring to Tim Tebow? Is he referring to some Christian celebrity as the basis for this question? Apparently it seems this way to Hemant, but for people who do not share his perspective, this question seems more like a baited trap than an honest question. If a group of Africans came to your community with the intention of converting you and your neighbors to their tribal faith, what would your reaction be? Would you listen to them and take them seriously, or would you just dismiss them because they don't believe what you already believe? Hypothetical scenarios are always fun in questionnaires like these. Is the tribe intending to convert me by force or by reasoned dialogue? I mean, I'm sure my reaction would be commensurate with their approach. Of course, it's much easier to talk about matters of faith in a cordial way when you don't have a gun pointed at your head or a spear being held to your neck. You know, what was the motive, or not the motive, excuse me, what was the means by which they were going to try to convert me? I mean, if they just want to sit down and have a conversation and talk about their views, of course I would sit down and cordially listen to what they have to say. I would ask them questions. And then I would respond with the gospel and see if they would consider the Christian faith. You know, who knows? Maybe they would convert to Christianity. He then asks, does God speak to you personally? Now, if he means speaking in an audible voice, then I would say no, he has not. The way God does speak to me is through his word. He speaks to me in my mind and my heart, and he speaks through other people to me. Now, this should not be a strange concept to an atheist. I know a lot of people would say then, well, isn't this just a delusion? I've met atheists, and I have friends of mine who are atheists, and they've said to me that song or that book or that movie really spoke to me. Now, obviously here, they're not necessarily saying that they heard a voice speak directly to them. They just simply meant that the message or the content resonated within them in some meaningful way. It doesn't mean that they're crazy or delusional. It simply means that there are other legitimate means of communication that are not direct voice-to-voice correspondence. Moving on, he says, if God spoke to you and told you to kill your child, would you do it? If God told you to kill me, the friendly atheist, would you do it? Another hypothetical scenario, but this one's designed to have a little bit more bite to it. He's obviously citing the story of Abraham's tests of faith by being asked to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice. This is found in Genesis 22. Now, this is not surprising to me because many of the questions in his presentations are designed with built-in assumptions or with implicit moral challenges. Now, this one's a little more obvious, but the technique has shown itself to be typical of the internet atheist arsenal. The first thing we're going to do is consider an important factor of the whole story of Abraham being asked by God to offer up Isaac as a sacrifice. This is not an isolated incident. This is a part of a greater narrative from Genesis chapter 12, where Abram is first introduced to the story. And then from that point on, you have 10 chapters or more of narrative that are showing Abraham's growth, his development, learning to trust God more, learning to believe God when God tells him something, to, as one of the famous verses says, that Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as righteousness. What that means is he took God at his word. He believed that God had the power and the ability to carry out what he promised to him. Now, what's important is that the birth of Isaac fits very carefully in this whole issue, because God makes promises to Abraham about the land and also his descendants. And Isaac is the child of promise. That's the one through whom these promises are going to be fulfilled. And that's a very important part of the narrative. So when you get to chapter 22, God is telling Abraham to sacrifice his son, and it's clear from the narrative that this is a test of faith. Is Abraham going to withhold Isaac from me? And of course, we'll deal with that issue in a minute. But the entire theology behind this is very important. Abraham believed God's promise that Isaac would be the one that would carry on the descendants and fulfill the promise of the land. So his reasoning was, and this is Hebrews chapter 11 actually clarifies this for us. His reasoning was this: even if he had ended up killing Isaac, God had the power and the ability to raise him from the dead so the promise could be kept. That was the theology behind Abraham's willingness to go through with this. Now, of course, the word kill here is a favorite one for atheists to use, since many times they will be quoting the King James Version of the Ten Commandments and saying this is what it says: you shall not kill. Cut and dried. But a little more work is necessary before you just arrive at that kind of a blanket conclusion. First of all, the word in Hebrew for kill is the word ratzak, and it specifically emphasizes the idea of murder. This is why most modern translations will actually appropriately render the passage, you shall do no murder. Why is that important? Because if one reads the entire Pentateuch, the Pentateuch of the 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, when you read the entire Pentateuch, you realize the command to not kill is not as cut and dried as many modern readers would think. You need the rest of the 5 books of Moses in order to interpret the 10 Commandments properly. But it takes more effort than reading just the King James Version and quoting it to a Christian and thinking you've won the day. The Pentateuch sees a clear difference between first-degree murder, second-degree murder, accidental manslaughter, capital punishment, self-defense, death by neglect, and warfare. So as much as internet atheists are prone to making broad, sweeping generalizations about the Bible, I recognize that one of the ways to deal with these kinds of slippery questions is to be far more careful to understand the context before you answer. So in that light, I would have to ask Hemant about some qualifying factors to describe the context of the word kill. In what sense am I going to be killing somebody? My son, or you, or anyone else? Am I defending myself from them as they're attacking me? Am I a soldier in war? Am I a public official who is responsible for carrying out the executions of a convicted criminal? Context is crucial here, so we would do better to actually answer the question by having some qualifying factors supplied to us. The other issue at play is whether or not the act of killing somebody is ever a justifiable action in the sight of God. Of course, the friendly atheist and those who share his philosophy would repeatedly try to trap Christians on this by putting 2 moral requirements against each other, pitting them together and saying, hey, you got a choice to make here, and then later accusing them of hypocrisy or of having a self-contradictory belief system. So, but in the light of what I stated ahead of time, just now, it's clear that the friendly atheist challenge entirely depends on the context of killing. So the next question you need to ask is, why would God command me to kill another person? Now, of course, Hemant may not grant that, but I'm just asking him to follow the logic here. If God is a morally perfect being, and He makes this request of me, there is a morally sufficient reason for it, like the ones I mentioned above. What if I'm in the position where I have to defend my life or my family members from an attacker? What if I'm in a war and I have to play by the rules of war on the battlefield, which is kill or be killed? What if I'm a state-appointed official who has to carry out an execution? These ones I have listed would be qualifiers for my actions. If God commanded me to kill someone, there are several questions you have to ask. 1, who is the source? This is supposed to be God. 2, what is the character of the source? 3, what are the qualifying reasons? One obvious thing that many people overlook, and that's this. This is the toughest thing against this argument that atheists bring to Christians. God created human life. It belongs to Him. He is the one who has ownership rights on human life. It's His property. Whether we acknowledge it or not is irrelevant. The point is God created it and it belongs to Him. If life belongs to him, he is the only one who has the right to take it or demand it to be taken. To murder someone of my own volition is an attempt to claim ownership rights over something that is not mine. It's trying to usurp God's position. So when you see it in that light, God does have the right to take the life of every human being, or order it to be taken. And as a matter of fact, he does take the life of every person. It's called death. This is kind of a top-down argument here. If God is morally perfect, he's the owner of human life, only he has the right to take it or command it to be taken. So if God holds ownership rights over the property, how he takes it is really a secondary matter. Should he take it himself or command a human agent to act on his behalf? The issue is that God is still taking what is rightfully his. So the moral wrong comes into play when someone tries to usurp God's position and decide for themselves who has the right to live and who does not. That's it for these questions. We're going to look some more at question 32 in our next video. God bless and take care.